And the breaking news at 7 p.m. Eastern from the Philadelphia Convention Center. It is game on in 2 hours. Two candidates, two vastly different visions of and for our divided country, as we are united as one around our TV screens this evening. Welcome to the fairest network on television, and never before has that word fair been more important. The fairness of tonight's debate and the fairness of the coverage will decide the leader of the free world. The presidential race will look vastly, and I mean vastly different tomorrow morning than it does right now. We don't know how. We don't know why it will look so different, but it will be vastly different. Even if nobody wins, that will tell us an enormous amount as well. Of course, it would be hard for it to look more different than it did after the Trump-Biden debate because one person dropped out. So we're not going to have that. But things are going to change. The political landscape of America is going to change. A senior member of the Trump campaign tells me the former president will leave absolutely nothing in the green room. Team Trump believes this is, and very well might be, the only debate that Kamala Harris will sign up for. And they say the stakes are a lot higher for Vice President Harris than for former President Trump. And there is reasons to think that they are right about that. The state of play heading into the crucial debate could not be more clear. Harris's honeymoon appears to be a thing of the past. She's trailing in a new national poll from the New York Times. There is still plenty of time, now 50-plus days, to win over voters. 7 in 10 Americans plan to watch most or all of the debate. That would put the viewership over 100 million. 23% say they won't watch but plan to get news updates. 6% say they don't plan to keep up with what happens tonight. They'll perhaps be the happiest among us tonight. So this is right what you're looking at, the important piece of the puzzle for Harris. She's faced a lot of backlash for not laying out more policy proposals thus far, and for failing to explain how she's changed since her last run at the White House 5 years ago. So when it comes to her last 3 years in the Biden-Harris administration, the vice president will take, we are told, not much responsibility for what's happened during that. Instead, she is going to blame Donald Trump for inflation, Afghanistan, the border, and more. Trump will counter that by saying she is the vice president. If the last 6 weeks on the campaign trail tell us anything, it is that the insults and attacks from both candidates, their very best lines, and some that we have not yet heard, will come out tonight.
She is a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country.
He and his running mate sure seem to have a lot to say about me. And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird?
I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black.
It was the same old show. The divisiveness and the disrespect. And let me just say, the American people deserve better.
Eric Erickson is with us, former volunteer attorney for President George W. Bush, author of the new book, You Shall Be as Gods, Pagans, Progressives, and the Rise of the Woke Left. Also host of the Eric Erickson Show. His newsletter show notes is must read for anybody interested in what conservative media is saying. Eric, it's good to see you. I look back at my notes. You were our lead guest on the night of the Joe Biden-Donald Trump debate. Neither of us came anywhere close to worrying about the right thing or predicting what would happen. What do you think a win for Donald Trump looks like tonight?
Not coming off as a jerk, honestly. I mean, let's look at this. Look at the polling. About 110% of Americans have a strongly held opinion on Donald Trump. Very few of them actually have a strongly held opinion on Kamala Harris. So he needs to disabuse people who have a negative image of him, and at the same time needs to be able to highlight the Biden-Harris administration enough to throw Kamala Harris off her game.
You know, there's that line from Kamala Harris, if you have something to say to me, say it to my face. That was when she was kind of taunting Donald Trump. Is there a risk, and you point out, I think rightly, Kamala Harris's lack of a hard opinion about her. There's a lot of people who have malleable opinions. Is there a risk to her of coming off as a jerk?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I mean, if you go back to the debates in 2019, 2020, a lot of Democrats themselves were turned off by Kamala Harris because her presence on the debate stage and on the campaign trail sounded too much like she was trying to win the daily fight on Twitter as opposed to persuading people to vote for her. And she never made it to Iowa as a result. I mean, she did not prove herself to be a good debater. The only time she really scored major points was on Joe Biden, and even that left a bad taste in some people's mouths over how she handled Joe Biden and allegations of racism.
Yeah, she still ended up as vice president, so she got that. This is Donald Trump's seventh debate as a general election presidential candidate. It is Kamala Harris's first. You've been through this a long time. Does experience help or hurt here?
It normally would help, and it is wild to me as an aside that Donald Trump is now probably the most accomplished presidential debater, having done it 7 times, more than pretty much any other person to run for president at this level in the general election. And yet at the same time, Donald Trump always freeforms it. That actually can help him, though, because he doesn't come across as stiff. One of the dangers of this is having run campaigns and candidates. Kamala Harris hasn't been challenged much since she got into the election. Even before that, she didn't have a lot of press conferences. So now she's going to be pushed on questions that she, in debate prep, it's one thing, but on the stage, as you guys were mentioning coming into this, I mean, all the plans go out the window. And Donald Trump has actually been grilled like this repeatedly.
Yeah, Philippe Reines, who played Donald Trump in 2016 for Hillary Clinton, we understand, is also playing Donald Trump, dressing like him, trying to match his mannerisms, even putting lifts in his shoes to give Kamala Harris that feeling. Quote from the New Republic, they finally added an issues section to her website. This is the New Republic. This is not a right-wing newspaper. Unfortunately for Harris, its release was undermined by a simple but telling error. The page's source code revealed that parts of the platform were copied directly from Joe Biden's campaign. And this is Kamala Harris, who says that she will be a new way forward. You're in Georgia. Your radio show's heard nationwide, but it originates in Georgia, the swing of swing states, the prize, other than Pennsylvania. Your listeners, who are fair-minded people because they listen to you, a lot of them are Trump agnostic, or at least Trump suspicious. What does Kamala Harris say tonight that looks like a win for her, that connects with people and somehow explains how she's different than Joe Biden?
She really is going to have to paint a different economic picture than Joe Biden, which is going to be very difficult with Donald Trump calling her out and the media making her own the record of the Biden-Harris administration. That's a problem. I do have a lot of listeners who they don't particularly care for Donald Trump, and they probably would have sat out the race had it been Trump and Biden. But with Harris, they feel she's a little more radical based on her 2019 positions. So she really needs to authentically reassure people that she was just saying that in 2019 because it was Democratic primary, and she doesn't necessarily believe it. That might hurt her with progressives, which is the difficult position she's put herself in.
The Trump campaign was telling me 2 things today. One, that on that issue, they're going to keep trying, or Donald Trump will keep trying to come back to, hey, Kamala Harris, you're the vice president. You keep saying all these things you're going to do in the future. Why aren't you doing them now? Or why aren't you telling Joe Biden to do them? But an interesting thing happened. It's always this expectation game. They keep telling me that they think she's going to deliver, and I've heard this word now a few places, so you know it's the talking points, a very fine performance. And then I had one particularly good source tell me they're expecting Kamala Harris to run some plays. And by that, they mean like, I'm that little girl to Joe Biden when she called Joe Biden a racist. How do you think Trump should respond to those plays?
I don't think he should take the bait. She's been trying to get him to take bait all week, mocking crowd sizes and other things. He needs to go back to the fact that this is her record. It's not just Joe Biden's record. If Donald Trump takes the bait, which he has a tendency to do, and I think it's fair to point out, he did not have a good debate against Joe Biden. It's just Joe Biden had a terrible debate. If he has another not good debate, you're going to have a lot of independent voters make up their mind that, I'm going with her because I like her. I really don't like him. And Americans are emotional these days, and they're mad about things. They want to go with someone they like as opposed to not necessarily the economy, unless he can reassure them that I am going to be the steady hand.
Right. As we go back and look, you and I are political junkies, so we remember all of those famous debate moments. Ronald Reagan, there you go again. I'm not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. You think about all those, or Joe Biden, shut up, man, whatever it is. They're never moments about policy. They're moments about personality. But to be fair, Kamala Harris has changed her policies radically, or she says she has, or her spokespeople say she has. But Donald Trump made a huge change as well on saying whether he lost the 2020 election. Take a listen to that.
So I was told if I got 63 million, which is what I got the first time, you would win. You can't not win. And I got millions of more votes than that, and lost by a whisker.
All right, so that was September 1st. He said that a couple more times recently. Fair question to Donald Trump tonight would be, for so many years now, you told us you won the election. Now you're telling us you lost. Which is it, and why have you changed? How should he answer that?
I think he needs to answer that as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are in the White House right now, whether I like it or not, and try to pivot around it and re-put it back to, and now look at the economy and look at foreign policy and look at immigration. Answer the question by not answering the question. I mean, there's this belief that candidates need to answer the questions. No, the job of the candidate is to answer the question you want to answer, not the one they ask. So deflect and say they're there now and they've done to the country.
Yeah, but both of them seem to be pretty good at that. Kamala Harris because she has rehearsed answers, and Donald Trump because he just naturally does it. Natasha Alford was on CNN last night talking about journalist responsibilities going forward post-debate. Take a listen.
This is our job, right, as journalists tomorrow, to actually push on the policy questions. Because what I do feel is that people are pushing for a higher standard of policy detail than they've actually pushed Donald Trump for.
Okay. Hard to imagine that, considering how completely thin Kamala Harris's policies are, basically that everyone's going to have sunshine, unicorns, and pots of gold. But are we going to see a change, you think, in the media post-debate?
Oh, absolutely not. Look, with the exception of this network, honestly, I think most networks out there are circling the wagons around Kamala Harris. They turned on Joe Biden, got him out of the race, and now we're back to kind of duck and cover and not probe Kamala Harris. For God's sakes, the Associated Press has written more on Kamala Harris cooking in the last week than they have on her policy positions.
It's good to have you on. I would point out there's other networks circling the wagons around Donald Trump. We will circle the wagons around the viewers, as you do as well, and advocate for your listeners. Eric, it's great to see you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Have fun tonight.
We will. 50 million plus Americans are going to watch tonight. We're glad you are joining us on NewsNation here. But Harris and Trump don't have all 50 million of you in mind. They have some very specific viewers in mind. Who and how they will tailor their remarks. The key words to watch for next. And over, we hear about the polls. But there is one thing left out. Every time all these journalists talk about the polls, they leave out one thing. We'll tell you what that is and how it can change the election.
Play and Alexa.
What is behind an unexpected slow first half to the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season? Slow in that only 5 named hurricanes were recorded the first 3 months of the 6-month period. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey cites 2 major factors.
We have had an active African monsoon, but that monsoon has been displaced unusually far to the north. There's more shear, and we just don't see the development that we typically or characteristically see. The structure of the atmosphere is a little little bit different than what we typically see over the Atlantic basin. There is warmer than average air aloft.
That warmer air capping thunderstorm development in the African tropical zone of the Atlantic. In addition,
several episodes of Saharan dust as the winds blow off the African continent to the west. Sometimes that Saharan dust can act as a suppressant to thunderstorm activity. And then we've had a later developing La Nina than we originally expected.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Thanks for listening to NewsNation on the Go. I'm Hannah Doba, and this is America's source for engaging and unbiased news.
No place like home with your family around. Life is such a sweet insanity.
There is more to life than what you're living. So take a chance and face.
Okay, do you sense a theme here? Your favorite sitcoms from the 80s and 90s are all in one place. Rewind TV. Just go to rewindtv.com.
Did you know that healthy eating is important for healthy aging? Hi, I'm Dr. Griffin Rogers, Director of the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive, and Kidney Diseases at the National Institutes of Health, or NIH. My colleague, Dr. Richard Holt, is Director of NIH's National Institute on Aging, explains.
As you grow older, your body still needs protein and nutrients like calcium, potassium, and vitamins D and B12. To maintain a healthy diet, know your food groups and eat fresh if possible. Avoid overly processed foods and instead choose options that are low in sugar, saturated fats, and sodium. Read labels to help ensure you're getting a healthy balance of nutrients. And ask your doctor if a multivitamin would be right for you.
Learn more at nia.nih.gov and follow us at NIDDKGov. This is Dr. Griffin Rogers with the NIH.
Midday plans?
Why? Something the matter?
Why not spend it with Antenna TV, your home for classic comedy all day and all night?
What a marvelous idea.
Dennis the Menace.
Jeepers.
Hazel.
Holy smoke.
The Facts of Life.
Isn't life wonderful?
I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched.
I love it.
Just a sample of the great comedies every day on
TV, how it was meant to be. Antenna TV.
Welcome back. 50 million Americans watched the Biden-Trump debate. We're looking in the spin room there. Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota and a Trump surrogate, one time on the VP shortlist, holding court here in the spin room. He'll join us later tonight after the debate. Trump and Harris tonight will really just be speaking to a few 100,000 voters in 7 swing states. That's all that matters. Those voters, and they alone, will decide the election. So to give you a perspective on how close this race really is, our partners at Decision Desk HQ just updated their election forecast. North Carolina and Georgia are now toss-up states instead of leaning Republican. As it stands now, Harris holds a 54% chance of winning the election. So these are probabilities, not poll numbers. But her odds have fallen since August 29th, when she had a 57% chance of winning. Scott Traynor, Director of Data Science, Decision Desk HQ, Kurt Bardella, NewsNation contributor, former House GOP Oversight Committee member, are with us. Traynor, start with you. Is that 3% drop enough to say that there is a momentum swing?
Yes, it is. And I know it sounds small, but this race is a game of inches. It's going to be decided by a point or two. And that just shows us how close this race is going into this debate.
Bardella, thinking about this, one of the issues for swing voters, especially that we talk about, these issues, these kind of inches, are people in the middle who may have traditional values. This is from CNN's reporting last night about Kamala Harris's views in 2019. Take a listen.
She said she supported taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries for detained migrants. She also said she
taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries for detained migrants. She actually said she supported that.
She both wrote and answered in the affirmative when she was asked this. Oh. And she said she also supported it for federal prisoners.
These are things that, you know, it would be hard to think that you would come up with taxpayer funding gender transitions for detained migrants.
Okay, so this was the 2019 ACLU questionnaire that Kamala Harris filled out in her ill-fated run for president. To you, Kurt Bardella, how does she convince people on the stage tonight that she had those policies in 2019? She told CNN her values have not changed, and yet she is now a middle-of-the-road, can govern as a centrist, safe, not crazy presidential candidate?
Well, I think this is where you'll see her actually lean into her time as vice president to Joe Biden and talking about the big pieces of legislation that they did successfully pass, like the Infrastructure Act. I expect her to kind of make a quip that during Donald Trump's tenure, every week was Infrastructure Week, but nothing got done. Under their watch, they were able to move that legislation forward, the CHIPS Act, focusing on manufacturing, the economy, revitalizing U.S.-based manufacturing. Those are the key words I think you'll hear from her, and those are messages that are designed to appeal to that middle.
All right, so to that middle, Tranter, what words do we listen for, both from Trump and Harris, or phrases, that they are really focusing in, not on their base, not on the Twitter audience, but on swing voters who've got a lot on their mind? They don't watch cable news every day, but they're settling in for the debate.
I think you hear things like they're going to channel their inner Bill Clinton, empathy for economics. How much does milk cost? How much does gas cost? Can they afford to go on vacation later this year? If you're a 20 to 30-year-old, can you buy a house? If you hear either candidate talk about, that's how they're going after the swing voters. And I think we've seen Harris really go after that harder in the last couple of weeks than Donald Trump.
Yeah, and she talks about how she worked at McDonald's and understands middle-class Americans. Mark Halperin was on earlier today, his two-way program, which I think is fabulous, on YouTube. Not talking about policy. This is one of the best political journalists of our time, and he spent a long time this morning about the feel, the look, anything but policy, the vibe, if you will, of the debate. Take a listen.
This contest, which it is about gladiatorial moments, and one gladiator is a foot taller than the other gladiator. There's just some human nature there that says she could still win. She could still win the gladiatorial moment, but he starts with one advantage, which is he's a lot bigger than she is.
And in order to, shall we say, put in a golf handicap analogy, ABC is giving Kamala Harris a smaller podium and Donald Trump a bigger podium, so they appear to be relatively the same size on television. Kurt, is that enough?
Well, I mean, this could work both ways, really, because on one hand, depending on which version of Donald Trump shows up, he can come off as a bully. He can come off as those characteristics that kind of repel voters, especially women. On the flip side of it, it could play to his advantage. He could be presidential. He could have that tall, larger-than-life stature that we're also accustomed to seeing. I mean, the one thing that we do know about communication, the majority of communication that we experience is nonverbal, so those visuals and the way they present themselves will matter more, perhaps even than the actual words coming out of their mouth.
That's a great point, because as I was talking to Eric Erickson about, so much of what we see and hear at presidential debates that we remember have nothing to do with the policies. Scott, a lot of the issues that have been brought up, and you pick up on this in the polling, is Kamala Harris have the experience, right, to be presidential? Do people view her as presidential? It got me thinking about Joe Biden, who by any measure had the most experience and was the most ready to be president, right? 30-plus years in the Senate, chairman of Foreign Relations, vice president for 8 years, and he was so good at being president that his own party kicked him out, basically, after his first term. So when they talk about, and when the polls pick up this idea of experience to be president, what are they really saying?
It's funny. That question, in my opinion, is all about the vibes, right? Because as you pointed out, Joe Biden had one of the most distinguished resumes coming in to being presidential, and his first term in, his own party decided that he wasn't presidential enough anymore. I think what we're looking for Harris tonight, does she come across as prepared for the job? That's a vibe thing. That's not a resume thing. And that's what I think you've seen voters saying in the polling is they need to see more about her and to see that, hey, is she confident? Does she have command of the facts? Does she look like she can stand up in a debate and potentially run the country?
Yeah, I also think about that old test of being the comforter-in-chief, which oftentimes the president has to be to a country at one time or another. We'll pick that up with one of Kamala Harris's surrogates next. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Also, Donald Trump can do one thing tonight, one thing that will both anger and terrify Democrats, how his team is coaching him to do just that. You're looking live pictures of the National Constitution Center. Former President Trump, Vice President Harris takes the stage about an hour and a half from now. This is the pregame. Like in June, walking on the stage tonight, you'd probably want to be Donald Trump. He knows the presidential debate stage like the back of his hand now. And he came out the very clear winner against President Biden at the beginning of the summer.
I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
Congressman Michael Waltz of Florida is with us. It is good to see you, sir. I saw you chuckling there.
Yeah. Just chuckling at President Trump's expression.
Is that the Donald Trump that his team wants to see today on the stage?
Well, I think President Trump's going to be President Trump, but he's going to lay out a very clear contrast between what worked under his 4 years, and then we'll see which Harris shows up. Is it Vice President Harris that wants to selectively take credit for Biden administration policies, or is it going to be future-looking Harris, what I call California Kamala, that I think California is the canary in the coal mine for what progressive governance looks like.
Okay. There is something going on, and we're not quite sure in terms of the polls right now, especially in Florida, your home state. Donald Trump 49, Harris 47. This is a state that Ron DeSantis won by double digits blowout. What is this polling picking up?
Well, what it's not picking up is turnout. And the facts are 2012, there were 600,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. 12 years later, there's over 1 million more registered Republicans.
So was it I'm not good at math, but that's 1.6 million.
Yeah, that's a 1.6 million swing. And Republicans are absolutely, that enthusiasm factor is 100% in place for President Trump. They're going to turn out, and Florida is going to win, hands down.
Okay, so you don't think that all of a sudden you guys are going to have to start playing defense there?
No.
And look, to be fair, when we put up polling, in general, and we've learned this over the past 2 cycles, you undercount Donald Trump by about 2 points.
Well, and the secret sauce is how they weight who is going to turn out, right?
So, yeah,
and there's all kinds of opinions on that.
Fair enough. This is what I think is important. You were chuckling along with that answer to Joe Biden. You think Donald Trump would rather be debating Joe Biden tonight that Biden was still in the race than Harris?
Well, I think, they spent over a year preparing, at getting ready to run against Joe Biden. I don't know that anybody in America thought that the Democrat Party could just ignore 14 million voters, ignore a sitting president of the United States who had all the delegates there for him, and that would just create a switcheroo. Maybe it would have been an open DNC or some type of primary process, but basically just anoint her.
So if we think about Donald Trump in the Donald Trump that we know, the one that was on the stage with Joe Biden did quite well, or you could argue Joe Biden just did quite badly. This was Donald Trump distracting during Biden's answers. Take a listen.
One of the things people love about you is you speak your mind and you don't use a politician's filter. However, that is not without its downsides, in particular when it comes to women. You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
Is that the guy we get tonight? Somebody different?
One of the things, and Megyn Kelly nailed it, what people love about President Trump, what you see is what you get. There's not some kind of fake persona that he's putting on out to the public, like a lot of politicians.
Come on. There's different versions of Donald Trump. There's times that he's much more reserved and he's reading off the teleprompter. There's times that he's riffing at a rally in a lot more bombast.
I can tell you I've been to dozens and dozens of rallies, and he's almost always riffing. He just goes up there and says what's on his mind, talks about policies that he knows that works, and hits the other guy, especially when they hit him. But he just said it the other day, Leland, that look, and I hope he says it again tonight. I know some people out there may not like me. I know they may not like my style. But when you look at what I did on crime, on the economy, on the border, on the Middle East, where ISIS was defeated, Iran was broke, and you literally had peace accords being signed on the White House lawn, and you compare that with what we have today, you compare that with what we've seen over the last 3 years with inflation and war out of control. And he'll do it in his style. A lot of people like it. Some people don't. He acknowledges
What's a win for him tonight?
I think if he... this is really about which Kamala is going to show up. And he points out that she's flip-flopping on everything from fracking to plastic straws, depending on the audience that she's talking to, and just telling people what they want to hear when the reality of her record...
To be fair,
he points out the reality of her record is the most liberal senator left of Bernie, left of Elizabeth Warren, and what she's proposed in California. I mean, the California legislature just proposed $125,000 per illegal immigrant to buy a house when you have homeless veterans lying on the street.
Is there not, though, that same attack that Donald Trump flip-flops and tells every individual audience what they want to hear?
I'm not following you.
On abortion, on lots of things. He seems to have lots of different views at different times.
Well, what are the lots of things? I mean, he's evolved on abortion over decades. Bill Clinton evolved on gay marriage since the 1990s, too. There's a difference in a 30-year evolution on a issue and flip-flopping in the last 6 months on over a dozen. And, I mean, when she's running away from her record, and the Biden administration and President Trump is running towards his record and saying this was right, the facts are on my side, and I want to do it again, that's a good night.
That's the contrast.
That's a good night. All right.
Congressman, good to see you as always. Thank you. Thank you very much. The honeymoon is over for Vice President Harris, and her people will sort of admit that, too. Tonight, she has to prove herself. She's been practicing for days. What exactly has she been practicing when we come back? Packed with everyone spinning at the end of the debate. This is the pregame show. Vice President Harris getting ready to debate former President Trump for the first time ever. It is Donald Trump's 7th general presidential debate. Both Trump and Harris are going into this debate with considerable risk. You can argue, though, the stakes are much higher for Harris. The latest poll reveals 48% of undecided voters say they still need to learn more about the vice president. For understandable reasons, most people have an opinion about Donald Trump. Democrats can only hope that Harris delivers a night tonight like this in the past.
There was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools, and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking.
All right, with us now, Madeline Dean, Democratic Congressman from Pennsylvania. It is nice to see you. Thank you for welcoming us to your city. It is great to be here. That first clip, the Trump campaign actually brought up to me today as saying Kamala Harris knows how to run plays, plan out a line of attack and deliver. What do you view and what should viewers watch for as the lines of attack, the unexpected ones against Donald Trump?
Well, welcome to Philadelphia, my home city. You know I represent Montgomery and Berks County, suburban Philadelphia, so welcome here. And I don't call this the spin room. I call this the tell it straight room. Okay. That's the way I feel about it, and the way
we appreciate that. So now the answer to the question.
The question, well, what I actually think is what you saw in both of those clips is a woman who is confident in her ability, confident in the facts, confident in what she believes in and her values. So I think you're going to see a whole lot more of that tonight, where she will prosecute the case against Donald Trump. And because we know how he served, we know how he served as president. This is not a candidate who is unknown to us. We know what that administration did and is capable of. But I think much more importantly, what I'm looking for is prosecuting the case for the future. We want to reject the darkness of the past, the kind of a president who says, I'd like a nationwide abortion ban, and we want to look for the promise of the future for my grandchildren.
Okay.
That's what I'm looking for.
All right, fair enough. And where people spend their money tells you a lot. And today, the Harris campaign put out this ad as their pre-debate ad. Take a listen.
Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems.
Oh, she had a big crowd. Oh, the crowd.
This weird obsession with crowd sizes. It just goes on and on and on.
If this is about the future and voters' concerns, how does a crude joke about crowd size fit into that narrative?
Well, I'm not going to talk about the crude, but I am going to talk about the repeated insistence. It's a bizarre insistence by the former president on crowd size. We saw that coming into his administration, how his first press secretary got humiliated because he had to keep repeating the lie about the crowd size. So the crudeness comes from the Trump administration, from Mr. Trump himself.
Okay, but again, if elections are about the future and we're talking about what your constituents, the swing voters, because there are people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016, Joe Biden in 2020 in your districts, they're going to decide the election. How does focusing on how Donald Trump is concerned about crowd size speak to the issues that they think are important?
Well, I think there's actually some humor in that satire.
Okay.
That's what happened there. And you know what's good about this campaign? It's okay to have a little fun again. Let's have a little joy in our politics and our civic engagement. The darkness, dystopia, the misogynistic Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, who want to strip away my granddaughter's rights to their personal freedoms and their own destinies. They want to measure and monitor people's abortions, their miscarriages, their menstrual cycles. They talk about me and other women as postmenopausal and menopausal. Are you kidding me? That's what you ought to be focusing on.
All right.
Focus on that.
Okay. We normally focus on that when we're talking to Republicans. We'll focus on Democrats when we're talking to you. Yeah. There was RFK Jr. who just walked by.
Yes. Yeah. Mr. Kennedy, how do you do?
He's dropping by. We now have a Trump surrogate and a Kamala Harris surrogate here with us.
My name is Madeleine Dean. I'm a member of Congress. Your father tragically died on my 9th birthday. I'm an extraordinary fan of your father and your family. I represent suburban Philadelphia. I represent Montgomery and Berks counties. So I thank you, your father, for his extraordinary public service, and obviously your uncles and JFK.
Oh, thank you, Madeleine.
Thank you.
That's very sweet of you to say.
This is interesting.
This is quite interesting, and I think as a Harris surrogate, you have sort of ostracized Mr. Kennedy from the Democratic Party. Is that fair?
No, I haven't ostracized him in any way. I honor anybody who gets into the arena, but I count on what it is you stand for. What are your values? What do you see for the future? As I just said to you, Leland, what do you see for the future for my grandchildren? I have grandchildren 12 down to 3 and another one, a little girl on her way. So what do you see for their future in terms of the environment? What do you see in terms of women's reproductive freedom? Those are the things I care about. What do you see in terms of protecting us against the next pandemic? No, I'm allowed to ask a couple questions. You asked me. So, Mr. Kennedy, what do you see for the future for my grandchildren?
I'm very grateful to you for your commitment to having conversations and dialogues with people. And, you know, what I've said again and again is that, and when I entered the campaign as a presidential candidate, I said, I'm going to stay away from the vitriol, the anger, the name-calling, the demonization. I'm going to focus on the issues that bring Americans together, the values that bring us together, rather than these sort of marginal issues that keep us all apart. You know, my main concern in public life has been ending the chronic disease epidemic, and our kids were the biggest threat to our children. We have, when my uncle was president, about 3.4% of kids had chronic disease, and we spent 0 on chronic disease. Today, 60% of our kids do. and we're spending $4.3 trillion, and it's bankrupting our country. 77% of American kids are ineligible for the military. We have the sickest children and the sickest population in the world. We're spending 5 times our military budget on chronic disease, and we shouldn't be spending anything.
Thank you for your focus on children. Can I tell you 2 quick facts? I carry in my pocketbook, which I have with me right now, your father's button, an RFK button, when he ran in '68.
I can give you one of mine.
I have one. Somebody gave it to me because they know how much I honor him. The other thing I honored about your father and your uncle was their focus on the poor. They were not afraid to talk about the poor, that we are all in this for the poor, just like you're talking about we are all in it for our children, whether it's around chronic disease or other disabilities. So thank you for that. Let's focus on the poor. Let's focus on our children. And your characterization is misplaced.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Kennedy, we appreciate it. If you can stick around for 1 second, we got to take a quick break. We'll be back with you when we come back. Congresswoman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Leland.
Thank you.
Always
very
good to be
much.
with
We'll
you.
See you in 1 second.
Thank
back
you.
with Robert F. Kennedy.
The best to your family.
Thank you.
Back in the spin room, 1 hour ahead of the debate with Robert Kennedy Jr., former presidential candidate, now member of Trump's transition team. Nice to see you, sir. Thank you very much. I think it's interesting as we watch you walking around here that you have by far the largest media entourage of any of the surrogates, either Democrat or Republican. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them.
Ask them. But at the same time, Democrats are trying to use your support of Donald Trump as a wedge issue against Donald Trump. Democrats are saying that your support of him is a reason to vote against him. Are you worried at all about that?
I'm not worried because I'm looking at the polls, and the polls are saying otherwise. And
the polls are saying your voters are going to him.
Not only my voters, but there's been on Nate Silver, I just saw this yesterday, since, the last day of the convention, which was the day I endorsed, there's been a 40% or 30% shift in probability that Donald Trump wins the election. They're from 40% to now 70%. So I don't think...
So you think it's an unfair attack?
Whether it's unfair or not is debatable. I don't think it's accurate.
What are you looking for from Donald Trump tonight to speak to your voters, a lot of whom were disenfranchised Democrats?
What I've been saying is that the Democratic Party of Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy does not exist anymore. The Democratic Party, which I grew up with, was the party of peace. It was the party of resisting the corporate domination of our country. It was the party of civil rights, including constitutional rights and particularly freedom of speech. It was the party that protected vulnerable population, particularly children. And today's Democratic Party is the party of war. Vice President Harris during the convention had this extraordinarily bellicose speech like nothing I've ever seen in a Democratic convention before. She was preceded onto the dais by a CIA director and by generals, and this has never happened. And you've seen over the past week, you've seen Dick Cheney and John Bolton and 225 neocons endorse Vice President Harris. They're not endorsing her because they have changed. They're endorsing her because the Democratic Party.
Mark Halperin made that point that the Cheney endorsement is going to be a boom for Donald Trump because you agree.
I would agree with that because it exposes what's happened to the Democratic Party. These are the people who gave us the Patriot Act. And there's a
what do you make
line.
I thought the conversation with Madeline Dean, though, Congresswoman from here in Pennsylvania, was quite interesting because she kept talking about your father and your uncle as the Democratic Party she believed in. And the implicit statement was that you don't represent the Democratic Party she believes in. Where's the disconnect?
Well, my father and my uncle, incidentally, came from a tradition of challenging Democratic Party presidents. Well, my family's been doing that from the beginning of time. My Uncle Joe, supported Congressman Foley against President Roosevelt. My father ran against President Johnson, the incumbent president of his own party. And a lot of, the liberals during that day were not supporting my father. The liberals voted for Gene McCarthy. I think my father today, if my father were alive today, he'd be exactly where I am.
Your uncle won the presidency in 1960 in large part because of the presidential debate, how people saw him present himself on television. We got about 45 seconds left before Chris is up, which I know you're going to join him as well. Not on policy. What advice do you have for Donald Trump on the Kennedy style?
Well, I mean, the advice that I would give to both of these leaders would be to try to step back from the vitriol.
Any chance that happens?
And the anger. I hope so. I mean, you can always hope for it. And, I think Americans, we have so many problems in this country. We have the capacity to solve those problems if we come together. But as long as we're at each other's throats, we're not going to solve them. Abraham Lincoln said that a house divided cannot stand. And I think it's really, we're now facing the most toxic polarization at any time.
And who brings us together? I'm going to hand it over to Chris Cuomo here in a second because you're coming up with him. We've got Doug Burgum. We've got Tim Scott after the debate as well. 1 hour from now, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump take the stage for their first and perhaps only debate. We continue.